He surrendered almost without a fight. I don't like it.
Welcome to the madhouse, Batman! I set a trap, and you sprang it gloriously! Really, Bat? I don't want to escape. I'm having way too much fun. Knock me off. I did. End this. Pull the plug. Stop me once and for all. Over. Why, my dear delusional Dark Knight, it hasn't even begun. I just wanted to bring down your grim facade and for once let you see the world as I see it, giggling in a corner and bleeding.
Arkham Asylum is 11 years old now at this point. I played this game all the way back when I was 8 years old. This game is very special to me as it showed me how games can be more than a simple piece of entertainment and how they can convey a story with deeper meaning and create something truly special, all within this confined space of Gotham with so much depth and history. On top of this game is somewhat a homage to arguably one of the greatest pieces of Batman media, Batman the Animated Series, especially since they both share the same writer, Paul Dini. This game not only revolutionized the superhero genre, but the action-adventure genre as well with its combat. Arkham Asylum has been around for a long time, and it has aged quite beautifully. Sure, it has its flaws and some minor issues, but it started one of the best gaming series to date, and inspired other developers to create games that are just as special as the Arkham series still to this day. This game used 7 years of Batman history at the time to create this very special story, and not to be tied to any continuity, which eventually led to it being a part of its own very famous and unique Batman universe. Before I properly start, I want to get the nitty gritty out of the way. Yes, I played the Return to Arkham collection, which in terms of a remaster is a fucking dumpster fire, but it's definitely not bad, and it shined in certain areas, along with things like reworking Batman's face model to look more like the model from City and Night, which is a nice addition. Sure, there are some downgrades in particular with Joker's character model, but I tried my best to not let these criticisms get in the way of this retrospective of an 11-year-old game anyway, as the graphics kinda have nothing to do with the video I wanted to make. The retrospective that I wanted to write is a lot more narrative focused. I also don't want to retell the story in any way, because if you're watching this video, you've probably played it. But I rather want to break down the elements of the story and gameplay, and why they made this game so great and unique, with that annoying shit out of the way. Let's begin. At first, this story seems quite generic, at the beginning with Batman on any regular night foiling the Joker's schemes and taking him to Arkham. But from the very first cutscene, we get a sense of foreshadowing, and throughout this opening scene, foreshadowing is used again and again by the Joker. This opening scene, which I once thought was boring and tedious, is actually quite impactful, as it already begins to separate itself from that generic story, with this dialogue from the Joker, in introducing characters that were new to the series like Quincy Sharp and Dr. Young. Quickly, however, we are thrown straight into the action in what is first believed to be an escape attempt. The game shows quickly how much destruction the Joker can create within a matter of minutes as we run through the corridors of Arkham, and it is quickly conveyed to us just how much chaos the Joker can cause with the numerous dead guards who never stood a chance. On top of this, many inmates have already been released. However, when we see what the Joker has done and how he is only simply trying to slow Batman down, it is quickly established this is more than a simple escape attempt. As we progress, we learn of the Joker's intent, and his want to finish the Titan formula, and along the way we encounter many characters from the Batman mythos, and even some new ones as well, whilst ultimately trying to stop the Joker from producing Titan and taking over Gotham, which of course we do because we're Batman. The main plot itself is unique and takes a lot of inspiration from Grant Morrison's graphic novel Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on a Serious Earth. This novel focuses on the Batman's psyche and his relationship with the Joker, who has taken over the asylum, whilst also exploring the asylum's founder, Amadeus Arkham. This all probably sounds pretty familiar, as these elements are all within the Arkham Asylum game, and they are somewhat the underlying focus of the game as well. This plot is unique, but it is simple and provides a great excuse as to why the Joker would want to take over the asylum, and in combination with his chaotic and unpredictable mindset, creates a wonderful story and setting for the player to explore and experience. This iteration of Batman is voiced by Kevin Conroy, who I think almost everyone knows as the voice of Batman, especially in the animated series and throughout the Arkham series itself. Kevin Conroy is great in this game when switching from a more monotone Batman to an emotional human when it's needed. But for the most part, I think he really embodies the fact that Bruce Wayne is the identity, a kind of mask, whilst Batman is who he really is. This comes across a lot to me in this series and specifically in this game alone, with Batman almost always being monotone and emotionless in this series, which many may find negative, but I think for this version of the character works really well, as we never see Bruce Wayne in his day-to-day life and struggles, and as such, if we were to hear about them in this game, we would not care as much, since we simply just didn't see how it impacts him. However, when characters like Jim Gordon are shown dead, we see him emotional. He is still human, and we see how he stumbles with his words, and he actually shows some kind of change of tone in his voice.
I'm sorry, Jim. Barbara, I'm sorry. I was too late.
This worked really great in this game, because most Batman fans know how strong of a friendship these two have. It's made very apparent from their first interaction, and it's later reinforced within the second Scarecrow hallucination. But for the most part, this Batman shows he is not someone, but rather something, and we never truly get an in-depth look into the life of Bruce Wayne to see otherwise. The game does a good job of touching upon the Batman psyche as well, particularly with the Scarecrow elements of the game and his struggle with the death of his parents and how it still haunts him to this day. The first two Scarecrow sections really show how he still feels guilty for not doing anything to stop the man who shot his parents, and how it impacted him and led to him becoming Batman. The third and final Scarecrow section is probably the most powerful, and has the most obvious message of them all. We see a recreation of the opening of the game, a nice little fake out by Rocksteady. We see Batman now being driven to the asylum by Joker, and we see him now being dragged through the halls of the asylum. We see how Batman feels he may not be all that different from those that he fights to protect the city against. And his mind may very well just be as broken and as crazy as those who are in the asylum. Joker himself is explored to a great depth, and really done justice in these games, and Asylum really shows it as well. As I mentioned before, we see just how much destruction the Joker causes, but we not only see how strong he is physically, but mentally as well, through his almost genius level intellect. The whole takeover of the asylum was planned strategically by the Joker, with him getting his crew to be moved to the asylum via the fires at Blackgate and allowing Harley to infiltrate the prison, whilst also somehow finishing and perfecting the Titan formula, and also using his own creation of the Joker gas. All of this is done, and he is shown to be an agent of chaos, and surprisingly a skilled hand-to-hand combatant, which we get to see in great detail when playing as the Joker in the challenge maps, which showcases his ability to take on numerous guards all by himself. But a lot of what made the Joker great on top of this was his ability to read Batman, and it is definitely shown to a great extent, and he is shown at his best when we explore the relationship between the two characters and how they may not be so different from one another. The game quickly establishes that this story, and really well the rest of the Arkham series, is about the Batman and Joker relationship. Joker knows Batman almost too well and quickly uses it to his advantage in this game, something that's never really seen to a great extent in the Rocksteady Arkham series is Batman's own rule. However, we see a brief glimpse of this with Joker telling Batman to kill him, but he knows he can't and will never do so.
Seeing as how I'm feeling generous, I'll give you this one for free. Knock me off, I dare you. End this. Pull the plug. Stop me once and for all. Oh, you're getting too predictable, Bats.
This quick cutscene may seem insignificant to some, but it quickly shows how close these two are, and Joker taunts Batman consistently in a sick manner, which again just reinforces the idea of this game being a Batman and Joker story. We see it again and again throughout this game, whether it be from small snippets of dialogue between the two, or the end of the game where Joker tries to get Batman to change into a Titan monster and make him lose control to see the world just like he does, giggling and bleeding in the corner. One part of the game though that can be easily missed by the player but is so powerful with this message is these small interview scenes you can have with the Joker. Each time after a major event at the part of the island, you can go to the interview rooms, and Joker will be waiting there for Batman to ask him questions about not only his life, but why he does what he does. These small interview segments of the game add so much more to the Batman and Joker relationship, because it showcases this sick, convoluted relationship that the Batman and Joker have, and how it can kind of be perceived in a number of different ways by the player and many others. Personally, I always perceived this relationship within the Arkham series as the Joker being so interested and obsessed with Batman because he believes they are not so different at all, and it would only take Batman to kill to see the world as he does and become just like him. But these moments that add so much more can be so easily missed by the player, unfortunately. This relationship is somewhat the underlying focus, as I said before. It seems to be so much more important rather than the main plot itself, the plot somewhat being an excuse to explore the relationship between these two. Other characters in this game, however, are not explored in such depth, and whilst they aren't shallow in any way, they definitely aren't the main focus of the game, with Batman and Joker having the most in-depth writing and story focus. This is pretty clear and apparent. The only other villains who I feel had a decent amount of focus was Poison Ivy and her role in the story, which was nice to see, and of course Scarecrow, who gave the player a look into the brain of Batman, and of course was later given more focus in Arkham Knight 6 years later. But other characters like Bane and Killer Croc are pretty one-dimensional and add no real weight to the story, but definitely are welcome additions that help create a better sense of danger and immersion since we are trapped in a prison with supervillains. On top of having pretty well-known villains like Riddler and Bane and Killer Croc and Poison Ivy, there was a surprising amount of Easter eggs which really gave us a look into the lesser-known characters of the Batman lore, like Maxi Zeus, Prometheus, and Great White Shark, along with hints to characters who are yet to be introduced into the Arkham series. Rocksteady showed off their knowledge of characters in the game, and really shows when we're talking about some pretty unknown characters. It's only something I wish they embraced more of in the future by actually including these unknown characters in the game. The asylum itself holds many mysteries and secrets within it, and it is a self-contained area that is arguably the most iconic location of the Batman lore. The player gets to explore this famous location and see everything from the old dilapidated parts of the Asylum Mansion, Penitentiary and sewers, whilst exploring the new areas such as intensive treatment and the medical facility. The game sets out to create this feeling of creepiness and mystery right from the beginning, and arguably reaches its climax when we get to the really insane part of the asylum, the Penitentiary. The game creates a kind of tone that's somewhat similar to horror games through its use of diegetic and non-diegetic sound, along with combining some extremely unsettling environments and some very, very crazy inmates. Tone and aesthetic are one of the things the game achieved greatly, and really set it apart from other superhero games, and it decided to feel something more like out of a graphic novel. From the grungy, dirty, disgusting halls of the penitentiary to the brand new clean and technological walls of the intensive treatment, the game creates a feeling of unease and mystery without fail, and compels the player to explore this famous place within the Batman lore and show us just how many secrets and horrors can be found in the asylum. Each area of the asylum feels almost completely different from one another, which is due to the change in art direction and musical score from each one, thanks to Nick Arundel and John Fish, who have made an amazing soundtrack and musical direction with their use of diegetic and non-diegetic sounds, which I'm going to refer to constantly in this retrospective. The intensive treatment at the beginning feels very fresh and new. Its colour is predominantly blue. This area is used to hold new inmates and those who were just transferred from the Blackgate prison after the fire, which destroyed a large amount of that prison. This area, I feel, is probably about as welcoming as they get in the asylum, which makes sense as it is the tutorial area. It never really feels mysterious or creepy as much as the other places, but it definitely holds its own mysteries. But this area is nowhere close to how uneasy and mysterious the asylum can get. The medical facility is somewhat the same for the most part. It feels like a relatively new area, with it feeling somewhat modern like intensive treatment. Rocksteady do definitely ramp up the elements of horror and unease in this area with Scarecrow. We get to see Scarecrow's toxin at work, which show us the true horrors of Scarecrow and his toxin, which we get to see more later throughout the game. But the morgue itself is one of the creepiest parts of the game, and its use of diegetic sound is amazing. We hear those voices in the background when you first walk through the door, and when you try to get out, you know you're now stuck in that morgue, which is scary enough alone. We also get to see a first deep dive into Batman's mind and psyche here, with his parents' bodies being in those body bags. The Scarecrow elements of the medical facility are what enhance this area and make it feel all that just more scary and horrifying than it should be. The next area we get a quick glimpse of is the sewers and the caves of the asylum, which of course Batman has his own Batcave there as well. But it also shows the more dated parts of the asylum, and we see structures collapsing, and not having the ability to grapple onto these collapsing structures shows how old the asylum is, and we just see how the facility is just as unstable as the inmates it houses. The Arkham Mansion probably holds the most mystery out of the whole asylum, as it is the oldest building in the asylum, and it contains things such as Amadeus Arkham's cell and odd little bits that hint towards other major characters in the Batman lore, along with the biggest Easter egg of them all in the game, the secret plans for Arkham City. The Penitentiary holds the most insane of the inmates, and I think it feels the most creepiest and the darkest of the whole asylum, which again is simply achieved through the use of diegetic and non-diegetic music combined with an amazing art direction. The screams of those inmates are probably one of the most unsettling things I've heard whilst playing a game, and it certainly freaked me the fuck out at 8 years old. This is definitely one of the more older parts of the asylum. You can see a clear difference with old prison cells combined with new high-tech doors that were installed in the asylum. It houses probably the most dangerous of Batman's foes, such as Poison Ivy and Clayface. And finally, the gardens, one of the older parts of the asylum as well, which again holds a lot of mystery just like the mansion, with a whole underground cavern underneath and a secret lab. Plus there are some nice hints and Easter eggs to villains who were not in this game or ever seen in the series. This place is unsurprisingly prominently green, and looks very much like the original version of the game did, with a green hue being used in certain areas of the gardens. All of these areas use Batman's rich history and lore to create mystery and depth in the asylum, along with creating new characters who only add more to these areas, which allow us to explore a darker and grounded story in this horrifying area located within the Gotham Bay. Each place within the asylum is very gothic and Victorian era alike. It really sold this island as a part of the Batman universe, whilst also looking very unique. The world of Arkham Asylum is captured amazingly and includes so many Easter eggs and hidden gems for the player to find. But where this game really shined and where it made its mark on not only the superhero genre but the action-adventure genre was its combat. The simple yet stylistic free-flow system combat was what really sold this game and led to many developers taking inspiration and recreating the combat we see in this game. The free flow combat was pretty simple. Press a button to punch, another button to counter when prompted, and try not to lose your combo or get hit. This was so much fun, and when combined with flashy animations and having you feel like you were in complete control of the combat situation, was amazing. It took a little skill and time to get used to and master, but over time you really felt like Batman, and you would take down numerous thugs flawlessly. Funnily enough though, this game is so bare bones when it comes to combat now, and it feels kind of dated because of how well Rocksteady managed to advance the system and evolve it in future titles. See, in this game, you only have the ability to get a variation of 9 different moves, which is nothing compared to the future titles where the variation was up to 15. But it was kept relatively simple and just polished, with the only gadgets being used in combat was the Batclaw and Batarang, along with a simple throw and an instant takedown. The inclusion of these elements helped create a good sense of control over the combat situation, and the flashy animations and these elements really helped you feel like you were above the average thug in combat. Even though it was very polished at the time, it feels rough now, 11 years later, but at the time it was something that had never been seen before, and the combat was so unique and amazing. When looking back on the history of this game, interestingly enough, the combat was originally going to be rhythm-based, kind of like Guitar Hero, and then it was going to be 2D as well. And thankfully Rocksteady decided not to do this, because that would have been complete and utter shit. However, without this amazing combat system, the game may have not gotten the praise it deserved, because yes, you can have an amazing story like this, but it could have been held back so heavily if the combat was terrible, which is something you definitely want to get right when making a Batman game. When it came to enemies, they were pretty simple in this game as well, with there being 6 different types of enemies: regular henchmen, gun-wielding henchmen, knife-wielding henchmen, kinda like the armored henchmen in the future series, stun stick-wielding henchmen, and the insane and titan enemies. And whilst it seems lacking now, at the time this really created pressure on the player due to the amount of moves you were restricted to. This smaller variety of enemies worked really well in combination with those limited moves, and it makes sense with the enemies only having access to very little to use in combat since they are on Arkham Island. Each archetype provided their own challenge, even though some were extremely easy to take down, like the insane inmates. The Titans were extremely simple to take down as well, and I know they were meant to add more challenge to the game, but even on hard mode they provided no real difficulty to me. Just throw a batarang and jump out of the way. It was very simple. Thankfully this enemy was improved upon in City, and I felt provided more of a challenge in that game. But in the Asylum, these were essentially mini-bosses that I never felt added any challenge to the game, and were just annoying because they took so long to take down. The other enemies, however, stopped the game's combat from getting stale, with the electric batons forcing you to leap over the thugs and hit him from behind, whilst the knife-wielding thug forced you to stun them with your cape, and then punch them because they could block your attacks very easily. The knife-wielding archetype was split into 2 different types of thugs in Arkham City, which was definitely the right call by Rocksteady. The gun-wielding henchmen were relatively easy to avoid as well in free-flow combat. You just either took them out first or used the batarang to stun them so they wouldn't shoot. And then the insane inmates, the last archetype that were in the game, were really fucking easy. You just had to quickly counter them and then ground takedown them. Personally, I don't know if these inmates were considered to be a challenge or if they were just added to add a little bit more immersion to the asylum. I will say they definitely added a good sense of fear, and they were creepy as hell. They definitely had some really cool and unique designs as well, with some cheap jump scares because for some reason they just didn't pop up on Batman's detective vision. Whilst the free flow combat was amazing, it was only one of the forms of combat that created this feeling of being Batman and in control. The game's stealth system, named the Predator system, had Batman show off his use of stealth and how to use the environment to his advantage. The Predator segments are a lot of fun, and probably require a lot more skill than the free flow combat. However, you always felt like the Predator in the room, using the gargoyles to survey massive rooms with armed henchmen who could quickly take down Batman if spotted. You had the choice of silent takedowns, explosive jail takedowns, ledge takedowns, ground takedowns, the list goes on. You also had detective vision, which allowed you to see the thugs at all times when surveying the room, and with ease figure out who to isolate and take down first. As you played in these Predator segments, you could even see the thugs' heartbeat rise as you took down their friends and isolated each of them, which led to a change in how they walk, how they carry themselves, and how they interact with those around them. You can see the fear in the way they walk and hold themselves. It creates a great sense of immersion and inclusion, along with you just feeling more in control as always. Over the course of the game, however, it does get harder with these Predator segments. Things like alarms being implemented so that each time you took down someone, the others would know and go investigating, forcing you to move quicker, and finally by the end of the game, gargoyles would be primed to explode, forcing you to find a makeshift vantage point and constantly be moving in order to isolate their henchmen and take them down without being seen. The Predator system, much like the free flow system in this game, was a bit bare bones compared to future titles, and definitely had issues as well with it feeling too easy at times, but nevertheless it was always fun to toy with thugs and scare them and feel in complete control the whole time. An element of gameplay that probably had the most added to it in future titles was Traversal. This island is tiny, it's not very vertical, it was extremely horizontal, and bits that had a lot of verticality to it usually forces you to climb and shimmy due to the island being too old, something we never saw of in future titles, and Batman was usually forced to run everywhere or open many vents to get through the facilities of the island. There's only a few places to grapple to and a few places to glide off. However, Traversal was very slow and honestly it didn't need to be fast anyway. There was no need for dive bombing and there was certainly no need for the Batmobile, so the game was definitely a lot slower in terms of traversal and navigation. This really just adds to that isolated and grounded feeling along with immersion. Sure, it's a hell of a lot faster to get around Arkham City and Gotham and Arkham Knight, but Asylum was so small and a lot more linear, it never really needed to be so easy to traverse. See, this game, unlike the rest, puts the player on a linear path right up until the end. You're forced to go to each separate building when the story tasks you to, and when you try to deviate off that path, either Batman won't allow it, and after Poison Ivy is injected with Titan, her plans stop you from entering the most areas that you've been to. Up until this playthrough, it never occurred to me just how linear and story-driven this game is. And honestly, it works so well in the confines of the story, as Batman is tasked with one thing in the whole game: stop the Joker. The only side missions that are available to us, if you can even call it that, is the Riddler and Spirit of Arkham, which is technically part of the riddles anyway. Due to Batman being stuck on the island, his main focus being the Joker, he isn't going to deviate from what his main objective is. Now, yes, by the end of the game, after you stop Poison Ivy, you can go and collect the last of the Riddler trophies, but throughout the whole game, you are forced to complete the main story up until the very end, pretty much. This works perfectly, if I'm being honest, and creates a coherent story where the protagonist isn't being distracted every 30 seconds to go do something unrelated to the main story, especially in a story that's as tight and quick as this one. Speaking of side missions, or rather collectibles, I will say I think this game honestly does it best. The riddles are fresh, and they were a new concept at the time, and there isn't a ridiculous fucking amount of them. I also noticed that whilst playing this game, you can collect almost 3/4 of those riddles whilst playing the main story, if you pay attention. By the end of the game, I only had about 20 riddles to get before fighting Joker. I will say though, the fact that breakable objects, which are just Joker teeth in this game, aren't on the map is fucking infuriating. I spent probably an extra 30 minutes than I should have trying to find one Joker teeth, because I had to literally explore every nook and cranny of the medical facility and the sewers. However, this tight and well executed side mission, I guess, works great in the story and provides a coherent side mission combined with the main mission, along with it being a very smart way to implement a villain who isn't even on Arkham Island. Unlike the other games, there pretty much are no side missions in this one, unless you want to call the riddles side missions, and I know some people wish there was more to do, but if there was, it would become incoherent and take away from that isolated feeling within the asylum, very similar to like what it is with Traversal. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is a very big and important thing to me in this game: boss fights. The boss fights in this game were pretty meh, except for one, whilst combat situations that involved the villains, but were not necessarily what I call boss fights, worked far better in my opinion. The Bane boss fight is the first real boss fight of the game, and is probably the worst. It's essentially just a reskinned Titan fight with some extra dialogue between Bane and Batman. Yes, Bane is a little stronger than a Titan, but it's no different to any other Titan fight. Throw a Batarang, jump out of the way, then punch him whilst he's stunned. You only have to do this roughly 9 times and you're done. It's really boring, and yeah, it looks cool in certain elements, but it also butchers the character of Bane. It makes him a bumbling idiot, which they tried to rectify and give reason to as to why in Origins, which is where Bane is really given any justice in the Arkham series. However, the other boss fight that is pretty much a proper boss fight, I would say, is the Poison Ivy boss fight. It's a lot of fun. It gives strategy and requires you to at least think. Yes, the gameplay mechanics are a lot similar. Jump out of the way and throw a Batarang. But when you have to avoid vines and take down henchmen, whilst also avoiding spits from her plants, it's harder and requires a little bit more thought. Poison Ivy's boss fight in this game is also just fun to look at, and it's challenging. Overall, it was a lot of fun to play, unlike the last boss fight of the game, which is Joker's. I understand, it's kinda hard to put someone who is physically strong, but still weak in comparison to Batman in a hand-to-hand fight. But I feel Joker's boss fight was just wrong, and once again boiled down to another Titan boss fight, and probably the worst boss fight of the game. And yes, I think it was worse than Bane's, if I'm being honest. You are forced to take down henchmen, then pull down Joker with an Ultra Batclaw. Repeat 2 more times, you're done. It was kind of a cop-out, and I think Rocksteady struggled with these kinds of boss fights in Asylum. Luckily, they kind of gave justice to the boss fights with Mr. Freeze and Ra's al Ghul in City, but they kind of sucked in Asylum, if I'm being honest, and were just poorly executed and almost seemed like an afterthought. However, Asylum shines best when pitted against villains, but not in the conventional boss fight way, where you don't have to simply deplete their health bar. By far, the best example of this is the Killer Croc section, and it is probably the best part of the game when it comes to tone, aesthetic, execution, pretty much everything. It really pushes the game to its limits and the player. This segment, whilst once my most hated just due to how scary it was, is probably my favourite segment now after this replay. I knew this part of the game was coming and I was dreading it. However, I maintained focus and did it. This part of the game is so freaky because once again, it utilizes diegetic and non-diegetic sound to scare the absolute shit out of the player. Whilst walking through Croc's lair, all you hear is the water dripping and the wooden boards beneath you moving right up until he jumps out of the water, which you're notified per sound cue. However, if you're at a spot where there are 4 different sections, you have no idea where he's coming from, and it only creates more fear and uneasiness in the player. Along with that, just knowing at any time this huge hulking monster could jump out at any time and take you down in his domain is so unnerving. This segment is so well done. It's amazing from the level design through to the tone. This segment embodies what makes the tone in this game so great and how dangerous the world of Batman is. Other scenarios like these with Scarecrow are a lot of fun as well. I've already talked about how they provide more meaning to the character of Batman and his psyche, but they also provide a great sense of danger just like Croc's lair, and change up the gameplay and make it a kind of 2D platformer in a sense, whilst you're trapped in Scarecrow's world. These are what make Arkham Asylum great, these scripted segments where you don't feel in control anymore. It just creates a sense of powerlessness and unease, which you don't usually feel being this kind of force of fear and nature and power when fighting the other thugs and villains in the story. But we get to see Batman kind of be pitted against enemies that you can't take down by conventional means, and I think it's amazing how they did it in this game. An element that's always been a part of the Arkham series is upgrades, whether they are earned through XP or the story. Unsurprisingly, like the rest of the gameplay elements, this game has the least amount of gadgets than any other Arkham game, with a lot of them being earned through upgrades as well. At the beginning of the game, you only have the Batarang, which is the most basic and simplest of gadgets. As you progress through the story, you unlock Explosive Gel, Batclaw, Cryptographic Sequencer, Line Launcher, and finally the Ultra Batclaw. Whilst other gadgets like the Triple Batarang, Remote Control Batarang, and the Sonic Batarang are earned through XP and upgrades. The Batarang itself was quite simple: aim and throw at a henchman to take him down and make him available for a ground takedown. The Explosive Gel in this game isn't really used for free flow combat, and is used more for blowing open weak walls in order to progress through the island and also take down henchmen in predator situations, along with also opening up walls where there are riddles. Batclaw is the only other gadget besides the Batarang to actually be able to be used in free flow combat without losing your combo, and is used to open vents which are unreachable or pull henchmen off ledges. And then when upgraded to the Ultra Batclaw through the story, Batman can now pull down weak walls that he could blow open with Explosive Gel, or walls you could not reach with Explosive Gel, and also now pull 3 thugs instead of the 1. The Cryptographic Sequencer has absolutely no combat use and was simply used to open doors that were blocked by electric fields or gates, and would crudely blow up the control panel, unlike future titles where Batman used it to unlock the control panel. The Line Launcher, my personal favourite gadget, was used for traversal in this game due to how horizontal it was. It allowed Batman to get around with ease around the island. You could also kick henchmen whilst riding it, but you couldn't properly take down one with it, which was available in future games. The rest of the unlockable gadgets are kind of self-explanatory. The Remote Control Batarang is a Batarang you can control, and was pretty fucking useless in this game because it was so hard to control. The Triple Batarang simply gave you the ability to take down 3 henchmen at once with Batarangs, and the Sonic Batarang disabled the alarm that went off when you took down the armed henchman in Predator. But it was more useful for a simple quick takedown, as it would overload the alarm that would alert the enemies and quickly electrocute and disable the henchmen. A gadget I've only touched upon and barely talked about is the Detective Vision, the biggest and most important gadget of the series and a staple of the series as well. The Detective Vision, as I said before, allowed the player to survey the room during the Predator segments. However, it also allows the player to actually be a detective, kind of. It's a great way to implement the play into the game and have some kind of inclusion in the detective work that Batman does. Although it could have been done better, and I hope to see WE Montreal improve upon the detective gameplay in their new game, I think this game did it great. When the story required it, you had to scan things like one of the guard's flasks to track his vapors in his breath that he leaves behind, or the handprints of one of the doctors to track her movements throughout the Arkham Mansion. I know Batman as a detective was never explored to full extent, as it should have been in the Arkham series, but the detective vision allowed the player to at least be a part of it in some form, be immersed in the world when playing as the world's greatest detective. Batman Arkham Asylum may very well be the greatest superhero game to date. I love Arkham City, it is my favourite game in the franchise, and possibly one of the best sequels ever made. By analysing everything in Asylum though, it's amazing. The tone, aesthetic are captured amazingly. The musical direction may be one of the best I've ever seen in any piece of media, and of course the gameplay, which revitalised the superhero genre and provided some much needed inspiration for future action adventure games with the free flow combat system. At the time of release, Arkham Asylum combined 70 years of Batman history in this one place located in the Gotham Bay, which contained so much history and secrets about Batman and the island itself. We see how important the relationship of the Batman and the Joker is, and its narratives is one of the best and most iconic stories to date. It's almost as iconic as The Killing Joke or The Dark Knight Returns, all whilst being an homage to the animated series, one of the greatest pieces of Batman media. Thank you guys for watching. I've been Seth from Silver Soul Gaming. If you made it this far, you're a fucking legend. Make sure you give this video a like, subscribe, check out everything Silver Soul Gaming. All my links will be in the description as well. A lot of effort went into the video, a lot of time. This alone took 2 hours to record because I can't speak and I'm not a normal human and my brain is fucking melting. And I will see you guys hopefully later this week for another video.